that joint presentation of and ADHD, it's new as something for us to really understand, isn't it? We're really only again understanding that in the last year or two. What might it be like for people to experience both? You experience both.
But of course, with ADHD, I was one of those people that also thought that that was for children. I didn't think, I thought it was a behavioral thing that was something that people mastered. I didn't realize that it was something to do with brain connectivity and processing that is lifelong.
As something that adults are discovering, it's actually something that is rapidly becoming a possibility for adults to explore and get diagnosed in.
When I think about people having ADHD and being autistic, it's like yin and yang. So one cancels out the other. So you might look at the list of identifying criteria and think, well, yeah, but no, and so it can put you off the scent.
Yeah. It's like looking at something like autism and thinking, well, I kind of fit, but I kind of don't. And then you dig deep enough to find the bits where you do identify, and then you're pretty strongly know you're autistic. But initially, it must be confusing if you also have ADHD, and it's the other way around as well. Obviously, if you first looked at ADHD, you possibly would have found that again a bit, but also not so sure either.
And maybe that's why people have said in the past, oh, I'm only a little bit autistic or something, because they recognize lots of autistic traits, but there's some of it that just doesn't fit.
I think
not that they're not there. It's just that some of the traits of being ADHD are opposite to the ones for autism, which is very confusing.
So are we talking about ADHD and executive function issues today?
Yeah, or just ADHD or anything really that comes out ADHD-ish.
You might lead that a little bit more. I certainly don't have that. I don't have ADHD myself, so I don't have the personal experience to share in this case. But I'm certainly meeting it, working with loads of clients, obviously, who are autistic and ADHD at this stage. Getting more and more familiar. Issue. And at the same time, but now we're just getting a whole lot of names on things. Oh, that's actually very ADHD, and that's very right. So I'm doing a bit of reading on it as well. Been very useful, been very helpful.
It is useful, isn't it? Because otherwise you're losing out on things because you don't know where to look for important answers.
Exactly. Are you working with a lot of clients where there's ADHD?
I do have quite a lot because of obviously advertising that I've got ADHD myself. So I do have quite a lot. Not as many as autistic people, but probably several a week that are having ADHD or coming for ADHD coaching. Obviously, it doesn't end up being coaching as coaching because there's still some therapy stuff in there, but strategies and modifying processes and systems, and as well as addressing shame and what have you. It's all part of the thing.
And would many of them go the medication route?
Yeah. Lots do. And maybe it's the ones that I'm seeing because they are proactive about addressing it or believing that improvements can be made, so it might be biased.
Well, at least, at least we wouldn't be negative about it, we would just see it as one of the possibilities. Yeah,
it is, of course, a personal choice because it's an important thing, strong medication and controlled drugs and everything, big decision.
But often worth exploring. Some definitely transforms life for some people.
I mean, really, it makes such a small difference, the small changes, but the ways in which it makes the changes are sometimes enough to make
Crucial.
big impact on your life, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Very crucial. Yeah.
Yeah, not everyone can take medications, of course. Because you have to have,
No.
you know, blood pressure and heart rate and
That's
everything.
right. That's right. And sometimes they just don't work very well for some people. It's guarantee. Yeah. Yeah. Want to get going then? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Don't know where to start, really, because we did say we'd talk about ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we were talking about executive function and executive dysfunction last week. So partly in relation to being autistic, but we said it's also a huge issue for people with ADHD. You know, I've heard ADHD described as executive functioning disorder. That's, you know, like some of the executive functioning difficulties are probably even more obvious in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so much executive functioning problems with ADHD, as you know, that's a big feature, isn't it? I think with you know, with ADHD, as it is mainly about like impulsivity and the things related to that, you know, the manifestations of it in terms of being restless or disorganized or distracted, you know, and that can affect like jobs and relationships. Whereas autism, I think, seems to be more about social enactments, you know, communication and behaviors, you know, the differences and the challenges and the misunderstandings seem to be in that realm more so, whereas perception and memory are good. Autistic people have got great memories and perception.
And some of the in practice, like for instance in school, some of the executive functioning difficulties for autistic people also come from the spiky profile, as they call it. In other words, if a person is really interested in a subject, they'll concentrate on it and do really well. If they're not interested, you know, they're kind of in that monotropic way, well, then they do woefully bad in it, you know. So there's that kind of, and the same can apply in the workplace. So it's a different mix of executive functioning difficulties, though there's some overlap. But yeah, it's like, as you were saying, it's a bit more like the actual, some of the elements of how we would define ADHD. Difficulties with concentration, for instance, is going to very quickly lead to problems with, you know, carrying out longer term tasks in an executive functional way, and impulse control difficulties. One of the pieces of the ADHD experience that I actually learned more about earlier in the year talking to you, and learned more about it reading and talking to clients and so on. That's not so much in the core criteria, is the difficult relationship with time.
Oh, yes.
And that's very much a source of executive functioning difficulties, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like colloquially, we say as ADHD, there's now and there's not now. That's it. There's two types of time. It's either now or it's not now. And really, it sounds funny and everything, and it sort of is, but it's not that. When we are saying it's now, so like if I'm in session with the client, say, who's an ADHD-er, I know that while we're in session and we're interacting, it's now, right? So that means that they are, and I am, associated with that experience, with that information, with that communication, with the emotional exchange, with the meaning, with the purpose, with the flow, with the direction, everything, we're associated into it. So it's now. So it's really live and you can remember everything. It's like, yeah, get it. As soon as you click that button and come away from the meeting, it would not be unusual for that person to walk up their corridor into the kitchen, say, and their partner to say, oh, how was your session? Oh, yeah, it was good. Yeah, because they've still got the feeling, the sensation. And then the partner might say, what did you talk about? Oh, what did we talk about? I can't really remember. And it's not that they can't remember as in they've forgotten it. It's just that the consistency of memory, the retrieval, the reliableness of the retrieval, because you're not associated into it, a different processing has to happen. It's not the same as being associated into it in that moment.
Yeah, they call it state-dependent memory, I think, in psychology.
Yeah, that would make sense.
You're in the situation, then you remember it, and when you're not, you just don't.
Yeah, it's a complete. And then they might take the dog out for a walk, and they together, say, and something will happen, and they'll turn to their partner and go, "Oh, I just remember now," because something's jogged their memory about something that they saw in the park between two other people, and then that triggered off the association again of what they'd been talking about in the session, and then they might be able to recall it with depth, then.
And one of the kind of classic kinds of executive function difficulty that many human beings can have is the they in therapy or coaching, when people are trying to help somebody else, for instance, in making their New Year's resolution or breaking a bad habit or getting into recovery from addiction, they often say, I've worked a lot in the field of addiction, so I'm familiar with this one. They often say, you need to learn to think of your future self and their well-being. In other words, the you in the summer who will be really happy if you've lost some weight and will be really pissed off with yourself if you haven't, or the you who will be, absolutely devastated if you lose your marriage because of your drinking, and who will be really happy in 6 months' time if you've been sober for 6 months. You need to get hold of that future self. And when you then become that future self, you'll be glad of what you did rather than unhappy of what you did. Now, that's not easy for human beings in general, but it's like absolute. My understanding is that that's just almost impossible for people with ADHD.
It's very, very difficult. And actually that just knowing that actually can reduce a lot of shame and frustration, because
that's important.
Because that is a huge challenge. Yes, it is the key, actually. And of course, with all things to do with ADHD and autism, it's not like people cannot do things. It's just that there's a cognitive bias toward certain ways of doing things or not being able to do
That's
things.
very important. Yeah, it's not possible or impossible, but it's just much more difficult.
Yeah, and you might have to consciously keep remembering, well, what am I doing? Or try and find a way. So say, for example, if you're trying to stop yourself eating cakes or eating sugary foods because you do want to lose some weight, for example, or change your health in some way, it's not uncommon for the ADHD person to be like, oh, well, I just put it in my mouth. I just didn't realize until I was eating it that I'd done it, which is quite normal. And then to find a way of habit stacking. So it's like I can't rely on myself to be able to easily remember that my overarching principle or my anticipated goal, my anticipated outcome at the time of the temptation. The impulsivity is there, and the inability to connect with something else. But if I could associate it with something, so if I can somehow remember that when I open the fridge, that's going to lead to a bad outcome, that something like that can sometimes work. And it can give the person enough time to just stop and walk and just think for a minute, why is that a bad feeling? Can't remember. Oh, I remember now. It's because, and then you can track it back that way.
I know.
And I say track it back because it's almost like when talking with ADHDers, you can see them going like this, working it back.
Yeah, that's interesting. But you need the trigger, which means that the way the environment is set up is really important. You kind of need environmental triggers. And I when I've been kind of reading up some stuff around ADHD and working with some of the difficulties and so on, I was actually struck by some of the parallels with working with addiction. Like, for instance, some of the stuff I've come across that's talking about working with ADHD says things like you have to set up the environment to be supportive to the healthy behaviors rather than the unhealthy behaviors, which is exactly what people need when they're trying to get into recovery from an addiction. You need loads of reminders of what you need to be doing and not too many reminders of what you don't need to be doing. And it also, I've come across things like don't depend on willpower. Willpower doesn't do it. that's exactly what we say in the addiction field, you know. And yeah, and kind of, you know, you have to kind of get a process going, a sort of a almost a track that you can go down, you know. And that seems to be true again for both people with ADHD and people with addictions. Now, there's a strong co-occurrence between the two is another well known. That research goes back a long way now. You know, the impulsivity and various other aspects seem to mean that actually there's a relatively high rate of addiction amongst people with ADHD. But certainly, yeah, I was struck by some of those kind of similar solutions, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course, willpower won't work, or it will. While it's a novelty, it can be very really exciting for ADHD.
Very short term, yes,
yeah. But of course, it won't when it becomes unstimulating, or when the other shiny penny comes along, or if you're under stress, you know, it won't hold under stress.
Totally. No, absolutely. Say a little bit more about when it becomes not stimulating, just as a theme in ADHD, because I think that's an interesting one. Yeah.
I mean, really, I think of it living as an ADHD. If I want to achieve some things to get me going and to get it in hand, you know, for it to become even possible to make it as a habit or a routine or part of my life, I've almost got to gamify my life.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, so if you think about the people who develop the computer games and the apps, you know, with things that light up, you know, that give you these rewards, you know, that actually get that dopamine flowing.
Keep drawing you forward, with dopamine hits,
Because ADHDers are novelty-seeking creatures, and they they need the stimulus actually to survive because of the differences in brain connectivity, you know, which is what the meds are seeking to regulate, aren't they, to change. And so when, you know, often ADHD actually can be seen sometimes misdiagnosed as bipolar as well.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, because of the up and down, there's lots of optimism and hope, because you forget how bad it was this time, and it's a novelty, it's exciting, it's stimulating, it's easy to engage with something that's new and is full of hope. But then when it's not new anymore, it's harder to make yourself do it. It's much harder.
Yeah.
While it's new, it's exciting and it's front of mind. I think so the working memory comes into it again, you know, because it's front of mind. It's easy to do, actually, like having things out. That's why they live in messy houses. I say they, but I mean me. But if you've got autism as well, you tend to have tidy piles of mess. so as an autistic,
you know where things are in those piles.
Oh, well, not if you're ADHD.
No, I'm saying if you're autistic, you might have piles, but you know what's in them. But not if you're ADHD, I'm afraid. No, I don't have ADHD, so I can only talk from the autistic side myself. Yeah.
But that's why you leave it out in view. If it's really important, it's best to leave it out so that you can see it, or somehow write yourself a note to tell you where you've put it, if it's really important that you find it again. I'll often send myself an email or put it in my calendar for the week later. Oh, remember, Vauna, you put the thing in somewhere else, you know, if I've had to clear a room to decorate it or something. Because I know that a week later, I won't reliably remember where it is, and it's very distressing. You know, and you can't find things because the amount of times that's happened, and then real disaster has ensued. It's not imagined. It is real, and it's a risk of getting very, very dysregulated. And you can't always afford to get dysregulated if you want to work and be reliable. But if you've got people relying on you, you can't afford to get dysregulated, because then you're not able to work. So you can't set yourself up in that way, you know. So I will tell myself in advance, and it's like, oh, that's very nice, someone wrote me a note, and it was me last week, you know, that wrote me a note, and because it's in my calendar and only I get in my calendar, I know it must have been me, so I'll do what it says.
That sounds like, it's nice. It's like setting up that relationship with yourself in a way. Helpful relationship with yourself. And you know, talking about the dysregulation reminds me, you know, we talked about burnout a few weeks back, more in an autism context. Burnout's a high risk for people with ADHD as well, isn't it? Obviously, there's way more people with both autism and ADHD than we thought even 5 years ago. It's whatever, possibly a third or that kind of figure, But but burnout it's a high risk for people with ADHD as well, isn't it?
As you're saying that, I'm wondering whether there's a difference in the quality of it. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud as I'm talking to you now, because ADHDers, if we think about the flavor of sprint and setback, with the novelty, the optimism, the going for it this time, and then the frustration and disappointment and devastation, actually, when yet again you've not got to the end, or you forgot, or you let it drop, or you can't go on with it. And that can plunge one into despair, so it can be more of a sprint and setback, which is tiring, exhausting, and upsetting in and all of itself. But potentially, perhaps ADHDers have the capacity to bounce back if they get access to something novelty again, some new hope. Whereas perhaps for autistic people, it can be that burnout is where all avenues literally have, the light has gone out in all the avenues, from trying, or from not being able to, or from barriers, or just being too hard. And it literally is, I've run out of juice here.
But then, no matter how stimulating something is, if there's no energy left, there's no energy left. So
yeah,
for people with ADHD as well, that seems like certainly a possibility. I don't actually know now whether there's research comparing the statistics of burnout between ADHD and autism. Probably not quite yet, or not reliable anyway. But I suppose the way you're describing it there as well, obviously depression is a strong possibility, which again shows why there's the confusion with bipolar, because there's the very energetic times and then the depressed times.
Yeah, the person can seem very optimistic, and if they're very active as well. I mean, it's not actually mania; it's not the same thing, or hypermania, but it may be misinterpreted as that, with the contrast between the inactivity or the inertia as well, not being able to get started.
Yeah, no, as I said, I've certainly seen examples of that. People who were diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but it never quite seemed to fit, or medication never quite seemed to help, and then they were re-diagnosed with ADHD and made a lot more sense, and the medication helped. Medication help every person with ADHD, but a lot of people, and some people don't want to use it, but they'll seem to be of great help to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. To a lot of people, they're finding it does help. I suppose it is a personal choice, and it's a very personal choice, isn't it? And some people are not able to, because they don't meet certain health criteria to be able to take medications. It's an individual choice. I've got some clients as well who've actually were diagnosed as ADHDers as children and put on medications then. And that's quite a different story. So that's quite interesting, because those people weren't involved in that, and they felt that they were forcibly medicated as a child, and it can bring lots of different feelings as an adult, then. And some of those people, well, quite often, in my experience, those people choose not to have the medications actually as adults.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't come across those particular kinds of examples so far. And, I primarily work with autistic adults these days, but of course, I've been doing that now for a few years, and it turns out that some of my autistic clients also have ADHD. Like, a few of them have discovered it over the course of the last few years. So I've been working much more with ADHD in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years even. Yeah. A big learning curve around it, along with my clients. And that joint presentation of and ADHD, or AUDHD, or ADHD, or different people describe it different ways. I mean, that's something really very new. It's not new. I was going to say it's very new. It's not new at all. Of course, it's always been there, but it's new as something for us to really understand, isn't it? We're really only again understanding that in the last year or two. What might it be like for people to experience both? You experience both.
Well, I mean, I knew that I was autistic for 10 years prior to knowing about ADHD, because once I've realized about autism, I thought that that was everything. I didn't need to look for anything else, and that's for many people thinking about being not diagnosed, or not identifying certain things about yourself, which is really important to know, can put you at risk of losing out in life and all kinds of mishaps as well, not resolving things or becoming very unwell, or certain consequences in terms of your relationships and accomplishments. You're not, without the proper information, you're not given all of the choices. You can't make all of the choices. But of course, with ADHD, I was one of those people that also thought that that was for children. I thought it was a behavioral thing that was something that people mastered. I didn't realize that it was something to do with brain connectivity and processing that is lifelong. And so it never occurred to me to even consider that a person of my age and that would be relevant for me.
I know. And it's as something that adults are discovering, it's actually kind of passed out autism even, I think, really become something that is rapidly becoming a possibility for adults to explore and get diagnosed in.
And interestingly, I think that's why I didn't recognize myself as being autistic either, because I when I think about people having ADHD and being autistic, it's like yin and yang. So one cancels out the other. So you might look at the list of identifying criteria and think, well, yeah, but no, and so it can put you off the scent.
Yeah. It's like you looking at something like autism and thinking, well, I kind of fit, but I kind of don't. And then you dig deep enough to find the bits where you do identify, and then you pretty strongly know you're autistic. But initially, it must be confusing if you also have ADHD. And it's the other way around as well. Obviously, if you first looked at ADHD, you possibly would have found that again a bit, but also not so sure either.
And maybe that's why people have said in the past, oh, I'm only a little bit autistic or something, because they recognize lots of autistic traits, but there's some of it that just doesn't fit.
I think
not that they're not there, it's just that some of the traits of being ADHD are opposite to the ones for autism, which is very confusing.
Like for instance, there's a much higher craving of novelty in ADHD, and a much stronger craving for kind of familiarity and routine in autism. Again, like you said earlier, that's not a black and white thing. It's not like autistic people are only capable of liking, familiarity and routine, and ADHD people only novelty. But certainly, yes, on a continuum, ADHD is much more over on that novelty seeking side, and autism much more on the familiarity, predictability, systemized side. So they are in that sense polar opposites. I mean, there are probably overlaps again that people are identifying, like both can get hyper focused in different ways, but still the hyper focus is in both cases way beyond the more typical level of focus that people might have. And then of course there's a whole lot of things in common because of neurodivergence in general. In other words, growing up different, growing up stigmatized, growing up confused, growing up masking, all of that, of course, overlaps. But some of the crucial pieces are actually quite different. You mentioned memory earlier, for instance. Kind of, autism in itself, is usually goes with strong memory, at least in certain areas of interest, you know. ADHD much more associated with, and of memory being much more now dependent, state dependent, unpredictable, you know, all of that. So it is. It's, I mean, you know, talking to clients, I find, you know, and I'm on a learning curve around all of this, but I'm saying, well, in some ways, they're like, they can be nearly like enemies, you know, on a bad day, you know. But on the other hand, on another day, they can be wonderful partners. Because they have different strengths. So they're like the odd couple, you know. Can they live together, you know? And each plays to their strengths inside the person, you know, or do they just get in each other's way and keep pulling opposite directions, you know? I think there's no simple answer to that. It's trying to learn, really, isn't it? How to work.
Because I think that's why it's confusing, isn't it? Because especially with a lot of stereotypes that were around about autistic people, you see. So you're thinking, oh, well, let's say if I think autistic people are all very rigid and rule-bound and organized, and they're not very adventurous. Let's say if people might think that's a stereotype. And then if you're autistic with ADHD as well, you think, oh, I'd love to be organized. I'd love to be boring. I'd love to be in routines. But I'm not. I'm very adventurous. I'm very novelty seeking. So I can't be autistic. But it's not behavioral in that way. It's not observable in that way. It's like, even if you're an ADHD with autism as well, and you do like novelty, you might find that you did cycling, say, for 6 years, and you still might have thought about it in a very systematic way. You might have researched all the lakeside psychopaths, and be psychopaths, not psychopaths, and be able to, you know, and you might want to go to all of them. You find 12 of them, and you've got to do all of them, you know, one a month or something until you get around them all. And so you're thinking that you're being novelty, but actually that's quite autistic to need to do them all, because it's about having a collection and starting at the beginning and going all the way to the end.
It's part of the, you know, advantage of having a frame to look at yourself, like, oh, I'm autistic, and it makes sense of so many things. And then, of course, there's always the danger then of, but you also don't see outside the frame, you know. So if you start out thinking you're autistic, you could think, well, I don't have ADHD because I'm researching my cycling in great detail. You don't think, but I'm trying a different cycle path every weekend, you know. You just dismiss that. Whereas if you start out thinking you're ADHD, you think, oh, I seek out a different cycle path every weekend, so I couldn't be autistic. And you miss the other. I mean, it is for me, I mean, maybe this is a thing for us to talk about sometime, but for me, because there's a lot of mixed feelings and thoughts and controversies around this whole notion of labels, and are they needed, or are they just, you know, negative, or what, you know. See, I just think, they're frames for seeing things, and if you need a few frames to see all the important things about yourself, well then why is that a bad thing, you know? I've never had trouble with labels, really, you know. I think label is just a shorthand name for something. You know, it's just a short name for a list of things, you know. Yeah, great.
That's right. If you're using it as a shorthand for meaning and descriptions, it's if it's a slur, isn't it? Because when we think about all the clients that we've had who have lost out on things in life from not knowing, from making choices that weren't appropriate to who they really are, or that they're putting themselves at risk because they don't realize where their vulnerabilities lie, or you know, or they can't understand why what they've imagined has not been able to be manifest, and, you know, and then feel very depressed or anxious about it, you know, to quite an extreme degree. That's not fun, you know, and that's just from not knowing things about yourself.
Yeah. So in a way, you know, it's categorizing, you know, and again, people kind of say, oh, why do we need to categorize people? Can people just not be themselves? Well, we do. We categorize for practical reasons all the time, like just nationality, or, you know, people you know, feel they, you know, aren't the gender that was assigned at birth, or, you know, they want to classify themselves as a, a supporter of a particular type of politics or whatever, like we categorize ourselves, a fan of a particular football team, and so it is because labels are seen as negative and often used negatively, but maybe it's a topic to come back to in a more general way, the label idea. But I mean, maybe that's just a point to finish on for today, and that is that, officially we've got autism spectrum disorder, but using under the neurodiversity paradigm, we usually just talk about being autistic and forget about the disorder bit. Now, ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
But culturally, ADHD-ers say, I'm an ADHD-er. They don't mind the D on the end. Maybe that will change over time.
I know, it's interesting because, ASD is often, seen as let's not use that term, for trying to be neuroaffirming, and yes, the term disorder is still kind of hanging around there with ADHD. Plus, there is a form of medication you can take that reduces the symptoms. So,
somewhat.
Somewhat for some people. And that's something, again, that we usually more associate with a disorder, It's like, here we can ease the symptoms with medication, So none of these things are ever exactly like each other. Like, you can't draw full parallels under all the different types of neurodivergence, And anyway, it's a time in history where all this is changing. Who knows? I mean, some people are proposing brand new names for ADHD. I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, but people are trying to come up with new ways of describing it.
Because it's important, isn't it, for positive identity, which is really important for the shame and stigma. To counter the stigma and the internalized stigma.
Yeah, because the word deficit is in there as well. So I think people are trying to see, can the language be changed a bit? And again, maybe that's something for us to come back to.
And with ADHD clients, there's a lot of shame. It comes out usually in a comedy way. Like I did some laughing today when I was talking about myself. That's common, and actually it's shame-based.
Okay.
But it's not the same kind of manifestation of shame that you might get used to. People will joke about it. Oh, I forgot the thing, but actually it's mortifying, and people do feel very ashamed at not accomplishing things, not finishing things, not being consistent in small ways, but overall in the long lifespan as well. And a lot of internalized and internal rejection of oneself can happen from time to time. Again, that's not consistent. That tends to be periodic, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, shame is another thing for us to come back to at some point.
Yeah. But I want to end on actually some good things some strengths about being an ADHD-er.
Yeah.
That in terms of being a person who has a tendency for impulsivity and novelty seeking and can make you charismatic, which can give you increased social engagement. And especially if you're autistic as well, that can be handy. And it can make you have tendencies for exploration, to trying out things, so that you might get different opportunities or access to more opportunities potentially. And being overconfident and making quick decisions in an impulsive way can be really useful in some environments, especially. That's why you'll see ADHDers will work as paramedics or things like that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, and it often is associated with a high level of creativity and fresh thinking and making links that other people haven't made, and yeah, very much so. Yeah. Not necessarily in a predictable way, but in a very exciting way, transformative way, creative way. Yeah. So lots to come back to again there. We might even talk more about some of the positive aspects, strength. Yeah, great. Okay, well, we'll leave it there then.
Yeah.
Time-wise. Yeah, great. Good.
Yeah, it's been a good year, hasn't it? Because obviously you may not know as the listener or the viewer, because you could watch this at any time. But for us, we know as when we're recording these that we've come to the end of the calendar year. And it's been our first year of doing this, which has been over a few weeks, not actually even the full year. But it's been really great, Eoin, actually. I've really enjoyed doing it. And
Oh, yeah.
We've chatted for ages anyway, haven't we?
That's right.
Most weeks. And it's just that we've turned the camera on now.
That's it.
It's great. Yeah. So thanks very much. It's been really great development.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things I love about it, which I always love about our chats, even before we were recording them, is that we learn as we talk. Yeah. As we're talking, learning more and getting more things clear in our heads and coming up with new questions. And yeah. So it's great. It's great. Yeah. So we'll pick it up again. We'll never run out of things to talk about.
I don't think we will. That's right.
So we'll keep it up. Great. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. See you next time.